Welcome to Knife Thoughts. This video is going to be a first impressions overview of this knife, and this is the Axial Knives Shift V3. So this is the newest out the front knife from Axial Knives, and if you follow the channel, you probably recall me doing a lot of videos on out the front automatic knives in 2023 because they became legal to carry where I live in 2023. And I've done several videos on Axial knives throughout the years and have really enjoyed getting to watch their knives kind of evolve and grow and their product line change and improve. So I was really excited to hear that they had a new version, the newest version of their kind of flagship out the front model, the Shift, releasing very soon. So this video is going to go up just before the release of this V3 Shift, which will be this Friday. And I have had this knife for a little while, but unfortunately I wasn't able to take it on a little vacation that I went on, so I haven't been able to carry it as much as I would like before doing a full review. So I'm doing this kind of first impressions overview, and then I will definitely do a true full review after I have carried and used it as much as I normally like to for doing a full review. So with that in mind, make sure you subscribe to the channel here, click the bell and select all so you know when I post new videos like that full review of this knife. Also go to knifethoughts.com and subscribe to the newsletter via email. I probably will do an article surrounding this knife also. So the Shift V3. I want to kind of demonstrate what the V3 is by comparing it to, or rather contrasting it to, the previous versions. So I have a V1 Shift right here in the drop point, and then a V2 Shift right here in the Wharncliffe. And now there actually was kind of a intermediary shift, I guess I would call it, between this one and the newest here. I didn't get one of those, and actually when I knew that Axial was going to be sending me this knife, I didn't realize that they were coming out with such a changed, kind of an updated knife, and thought it was going to be one of those intermediary ones between this V2 of the Shift and what is now the V3. So it was really interesting to see the differences. But the V1, which you can see here, had this angled and kind of pointed butt end, but generally the same handle shape, as you'll see across all of these. Also, mine at least had a little bit lighter of a actuator there. Like you can see, pretty smooth. Then the V2 had this kind of angled off, beveled off butt end. And so it made it be so that the clip could be switched, whereas it could not on the V1. You can switch the clip to the other side on the V2 here, and it's a little bit more ergonomic, and also one of the things that they said was that it was a better blade to handle ratio. So that was the big difference between the V1 and the V2. I do not believe that the V2 had the hammer lock, which I'll talk about on this knife, and it definitely doesn't have this bearing glide system. So then we get to the V3. So you might notice right off the bat that there's some differences in the screws, and that's really the first thing that I noticed about this V3. If you look at the screws, they kind of sit both slightly above and slightly outside of the frame of the handle. So, you know, you can kind of see that these stick out somewhat all across there, and you can see that they are on both sides, versus on the V2, you have the screws only on the back side, the clip side, and they are seated down in, so they're kind of countersunk, you could say, into the handle there. So that's a big difference there. And then because this has this milled titanium clip, which is different than the previous clips, which were pressed maybe, they were just kind of flat clips that were held on from the bottom, from the butt of the knife with one screw. This is, again, machined titanium clip has 2 screws, and then again is reversible, so you have a tab on the other side. And these screws for the tab here on the other side are just normal screws. They're kind of the same as these screws, and they stick up. They are not countersunk. So hopefully it will focus enough that you can see that there. And I will say that I don't necessarily think that I prefer the overall look of the screws versus the kind of less, the more screwless look of the V2. And I definitely don't prefer these screws. I think that it would be better if these were countersunk, but I might just remove this tab. So for the full review, I'll kind of think about that and try it out a little bit more in depth and let you know what I prefer there. But the overall aesthetic is slightly different also, and I think that the screws kind of fit in with that. Now, I did ask Axial about if there was kind of a different inspiration behind the aesthetic of this V3 versus the V1 V2. Haven't really heard back about that specifically, and I wanted to get this video made before this knife released, so that's another thing I'll try to update you on in the full review. But you can see that there's a little bit of a different style of milling. You have some kind of milled lines along the bevels on the V3 versus just flat bevels on the V2. And then the jimping is different. You can see it's kind of in the center here on the V2 as well as the V1, whereas it's on the edge here on the V3. I do think that this type is going to give you more traction. Now, this type of milling, I was kind of wondering what this was about. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it might give you some side to side versus the forward and back traction. Sorry if that was not focused, but this can give you a little bit of that side to side. And then you can see you have that milling on both sides of the handle as well as the milling on the clip. And I think at least my kind of first impression of the overall aesthetic of the milling and the screws all together, it looks a little bit more kind of industrialist, futuristic. One of the things that I've talked about on the shift, and particularly the V1 shift, is that it's kind of a sleek, futuristic look. It looks kind of like a sleek lightsaber handle. I don't know that I've said that before in videos, but it's one thing that I've thought, particularly like the old Republic style, like Dooku's, if you are familiar with Star Wars, just kind of a more elegant look to it, and again, sleeker, like a futuristic look, but elegant. And I think that this V3, the aesthetic, is still very much futuristic, but a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more industrial, a little bit more tactical. However you want to say it, that's kind of the feel that I get. It's more machine looking, I guess I should say. So that's the aesthetic difference. Now, one thing I'll mention is when I got this, one of the screws was a little loose. So I got it, opened it a couple times, and realized that the screw was kind of loose. I tightened it up and haven't had any issues since then. But speaking of the milling, one of the other big differences with this versus the others is that this is 7000 series aluminum versus 6000 series. And I haven't had any, kind of issues with this. I've carried it and haven't had any scratches or anything happen. From what I'm told by Axial, this 7000 series aluminum is like much stronger, much more durable than the 6000 series. And I believe most companies use the 6000 series. So this should be a nice durable handle. Now, one other thing about the handle and the aesthetic that I did want to mention is I really like Axial's logo. I just think it's a really nice looking logo, and you can see that it doesn't have it on this V3. Now, the reason I think for that is that this V3 has a different inlay style. So the kind of transition version of the V2 that I mentioned had inlays. You could get it with inlays. This V3 is also going to offer some G10 inlays and likely other versions, but the inlays on this are up at the top. So it's kind of an inlay in this area and this area, probably to allow for the clip to be applied to both sides. So being that they have inlays in this area, that might be why they have opted to not have that logo there. But I do like the logo a lot. Now, continuing with the aesthetics, I'll go to the blade aesthetics on this. This is the Tonto blade shape, and they will also have the Wharncliffe, like on my V2, and the drop point, like on my V1. And they'll also have different blade materials. So mine, as you can see hopefully here, is MagnaCut. I like MagnaCut. I've been using it a lot, particularly on Chris Reeve folding knives and the Axial Alpine, the fixed blade. I actually have that one, I think, up in my bag, so I'm not going to show it to you, but I've been using MagnaCut a lot. I actually had the Alpine with me on vacation and took it into the ocean, and it did great, no issues with rusting or anything like that. A little bit on the clip, on the Alta clip, but none on the blade itself. So I have enjoyed MagnaCut, but they'll have other versions, and I believe they will be 20 CV and CPM S35 VN. I'm not 100% sure on that, just not remembering exactly, but you can check that out, as well as the different blade shapes and the inlay versus non-inlay. But this is the Tonto, and I was really hoping to get a Tonto from Axial because I really think that it's a cool looking Tonto. It's a very practical looking Tonto. In my use so far, it has been practical. You get that nice straight edge. It's ground nicely for and out the front. And then you have this edge also, which I've used to cut up food for my son. I was using it to cut a sandwich. You can kind of just press down in. And then of course you have this point, which is good for cutting boxes and tape and things like that. So I think it's both a good looking and a practical Tonto. The other thing is that I do have a Tonto Ultratech, and it's definitely a different look. The Axial Shift Tonto is much thicker, wider, I guess you could say, less pointy than the Ultratech. I like the look of both of them. I think they're both pretty practical also, but I think I probably will give the practicality edge to the Shift. But again, I do want to carry and use it more. It has the 3 lines like the other versions, kind of a design hallmark of Axial, and I do like the look of that. And then you can see Axial on the spine here. Hopefully you can. And then the USA flag on the backside of the blade. And these are 100% USA made, like the other shifts have been. Axial has had a couple knives that were made overseas for them. The folder that they did and the first version of the Alpine, but the out the fronts are USA made, and they've really focused on moving production in-house, so I really appreciate that. And I would guess that that's a part of some of the changes on this knife also. But I think it's a great blade shape. Got kind of a two-tone finish with the satin on the flats and then a stone wash on the grinds. And moving on to the action here on this, and really the action and lockup are another 2 things that are different with this version of the Shift. So first of all, you can see here that this has this plate underneath. And so they call this the bearing glide system. So it's basically a bearing plate. You can see those 2 lines there, and it's hardened. So you're not gonna have the wear that can kind of cause some roughness and resistance when you're opening and closing the knife on some out the fronts. This is something that you see on some other out the front knives made in the USA, like I believe Guardian Tactical has this. I don't have one, and there's another company that I think uses this, but again, I don't have one. So it's a nice feature because I think you will get more actuations with less wear, and it is smooth feeling. It's a very strong kind of powerful feeling, as in it's not like too hard to break it, to break that that fire. There's not a hard wall there, but it is pretty strong. It's not as easy to actuate as the V1. It's pretty in line with the V2, and also pretty in line, maybe slightly easier than my Ultratech. So, you know, pretty strong actuation, but nice and smooth, and really fires out there. You can hear it has a pretty good thwack to it, and it feels nice and strong. And then it has what they call their hammer lock. So the hammer lock is supposed to reduce friction and wear and make for a stronger lock. Now, there is still some side-to-side play, a very small amount. There's definitely some forward and back. Compared to the V2, there's less in both directions. Definitely less than the V2. And then compared to the Ultratech, I would say that it's pretty close. Maybe a little bit more in both directions on the Ultratech, but not enough that I can be confident in saying that. I'd say that they're pretty similar, but it feels like a solid lockup, and I haven't had any issues with it. And speaking of the action and the lockup, I haven't had any misfires on this. So not a single one. I've been opening it and closing it a good bit, and I haven't had any misfires so far. So I've been happy with that. And like I say, it seems to be ground well, it seems to cut well. So a really cool knife from Axial. I'm really happy to see them continuing their line about the front knives. I have loved my shift knives so far, as well as the dart. And so I'm really happy to see this version 3 of the Axial knives shift. And like I say, they are releasing very soon, so keep an eye out on that. Make sure you use my link and my discount code, which is Knife Thoughts, and if you're interested, grab one. They seem to be coming in at a very reasonable price. Looks like this version without the inlay in MagnaCut is going to be like $229. I believe that my discount should work on that, so it should bring it down to pretty much $200, something like that. And I think that that's a great price, $210 maybe, for a USA made out the front knife that is really high quality, has MagnaCut steel, this upgraded aluminum, these great features. I think it's a very competitive price, you know, especially compared to things like Microtech, Guardian Tactical, things like that. So thank you to Axial for sending this knife for review. Like I said, I'll say it one more time. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you know when I do the full review of this knife. Subscribe, click the bell, and select all so you do know when I post that. And go to knifethoughts.com for articles on knives like this and knife-related topics. And subscribe via email to the newsletter. And last but not least, as always, don't forget to go out and do good.